There we had deregulation, Obamacare, borders and wall, cut taxes and trade, all right at the very beginning.
Exactly.
So how's he going to organize all this? What comes first, what comes second?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. So we think he's going to be focused on the areas where he can sort of put points on the board. And those are the areas where he has sort of executive authority. Trade is one of those. I think withdrawing from the TPP, he can do that without congressional authority. We're expecting him to do that today, if not later this week. Immigration, he can ramp up enforcement without congressional approval. And then on some of these executive orders that would scale back the Obama regulations. The other things, however, Obamacare, tax reform, infrastructure, those are all subject to congressional approval. And as we know, the legislative process is time-consuming, it's iterative, and those things are going to take much longer.
So there's been a lot of talk about Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. As you say, they need congressional legislation to do that. There are two alternatives: repeal, and then think about it down the road, repeal and replace at the same time. What's the difference in terms of the timing for Congress?
Yeah, and that's really important. I suspect that congressional Republican leaders really just wanted to advance with a repeal bill. That would have been easy. There's precedent for it. It's something, a similar bill passed in the last Congress. However, when Donald Trump came out several weekends ago saying that he's actually going to replace simultaneously, I can just imagine what congressional Republicans were thinking. Oh, goodness, because that has a chance of sort of hijacking their congressional agenda. Healthcare overhaul is incredibly difficult. To put it in perspective, President Obama, when he entered office, had an approval rating of 78%. He had larger majorities in both the Senate and the House. And Obamacare took 14 months to pass, and even then it passed on a party line vote. So these are really difficult, really complex things, and I hate to be sort of pouring cold water over the animal spirits, but legislating is difficult.
Now, the question is, on, what was it, Friday or Saturday, he wound up having an executive order declaring his administration would repeal Obamacare, but no one really knew what that meant.
No.
So signing that executive order, what does that actually do for insurers, for hospitals?
Right, exactly. So it just basically gives discretion to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who hasn't actually even been confirmed yet, to evaluate where they can actually roll back some of the things that were done by executive order. The thing about Obamacare is that the bulk of it was passed by Congress, but it also gave the executive, President Obama at the time, a lot of discretion to fill in the details. And as a result, President Trump now has the ability to roll some of those things back. But I think, to your point, the individual mandate is really the big question. Does he touch that? And if he does, then as we know, that could have some pretty significant consequences for the insurance market.
Libby, let's say I'm an investor. I've just spent the weekend looking at crowd sizes, some news conferences over at the White House. And I'm wondering, I've got big consensus positions on. I'm playing this big reflation trade, and I hear nothing about fiscal stimulus. All I hear about is Obamacare, inauguration crowd sizes, and things like that. I wake up Monday morning, where's the fiscal stimulus plan?
Yeah, so I think you're right. In terms of tax reform, there was no mention of tax reform over the last 60 hours. However, he did emphasize infrastructure. I was actually surprised by how much he talked about infrastructure in his inaugural speech, and I think that is somewhat a side effect of Stephen Bannon's influence. Stephen Bannon has been said that he's been very supportive of infrastructure. But I think you're right. This is where sort of the rubber meets the proverbial road. Governing is harder than campaigning, and these things, especially when they're subject to congressional approval, just take a lot longer. So if they're doing Obamacare, I mean, again, that could take up an entire year, and then that would push back tax reform and infrastructure. And because we haven't even seen legislation about how those things would work, the timing could even be pushed back farther.